guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Hi guys, it's Gina. Welcome to the Good Scare podcast. So, welcome back everyone who is returning for a new episode. And if you're a new listener, then welcome. My name is Gina, and basically on this podcast, I talk about all things spooky, scary, creepy, from horror movies to true crime cases to urban legends and all that good stuff. So, if you like that and you want to listen to more, then by all means, please grab a drink, grab a snack, sit back and relax. So, how you guys been this week? It is officially March. I don't remember if last time I talked to you guys if it was March already, but happy March! We're 10 days away from St. Patrick's Day. That's exciting. Shout out to all my Irish people. What's up? But yeah, so basically, what I wanted to talk about this week was I've seen a lot of people do that iceberg trend on YouTube, and basically, I was scrolling through TikTok, tickety talk, and I found an iceberg list of different horror movies and disturbing movies. I did find two versions of this list. They are both posted by the same person at Lelaire1, and I will link them down in the description below. I will be covering the shorter one because honestly, the longer one is a lot, and it's a lot more disturbing. Like, some of the movies that are on this list, on the shorter one, are on tier 7, and then on the longer one, they're on tier 4. So, that's a lot. That's a difference. But if you guys do want me to check out the longer version in a different episode, I will definitely do that for you guys. But basically, I just wanted to talk about these different horror movies, and if you're not aware of them, then I want to tell you about them. Now, mind you, we are going to be covering a lot of mature topics today, so if you're easily disturbed, maybe this isn't the right episode for you. There's a lot of talks of torture, the R word, a lot of death and violence and sexual abuse. So if that's not your thing, and you're not comfortable, then click out, because yeah, I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable, obviously. But if you're into that and you're down with that, then shit, let's go. Ding. Let's go. So, on tier 1, we just have more simple horror movies, and starting off with our first movie on the tip of the iceberg, not even the sky of the iceberg, is we have Saw from 2004, directed by James Wan, and screenplay written by Leigh Whannell. And if you haven't heard of this movie or have seen it, basically it's about two strangers who awaken in a room with no memory of how they got there, and they soon discover that they're pawns in a deadly game by a notorious serial killer, Jigsaw. Both men find a tape recording in their pockets, and not too long after listening to them, they realize that they're trapped in the game. So it's also interesting because the man who wrote Saw, Leigh Whannell, he actually plays one of the main characters, Adam, and the other one, Dr. Lawrence Gordon, he's played by Carrie Ellis. And at first, this movie is like honestly a classic. I mean, if you haven't seen it, what's happening? I mean, this movie is like one of like the first horror movies that really got the name of torture porn in a more mainstream setting, I feel like. And I mean, if you look at films like Hostel, most people will say that that was riding on the coattails of the success of Saw, but I honestly don't believe that. I mean, some of these movies came out a long time before Saw, and they cover a lot more disturbing topics, so. And also the director, James Wan, he was like a very small director, but obviously we know him for other movies now, such as the Conjuring series, Insidious, and others. And he had no intention to make a torture porn movie, but when the later sequels came out, they were like described as more explicitly nasty. And as for the first film, when I was rewatching it for this episode, I remember it being a lot more gory. I think this was because I've seen the sequel so much. I mean, I'm definitely a fan of the sequels. There's 7, 8, if I believe. The most recent one came out in 2018 with Jigsaw, but I honestly, the first one isn't that gory. I mean, yes, it got the name of like torture porn, but it really isn't that gory. And an interesting fact about this, the screenplay was written in 2001 when Juan and Winell, they shot a short film based on one of the scenes in the movie, and then they later signed to Twisted Pictures, which was a sub-horror label of Evolution Entertainment. So this is the first movie that's on this list. I mean, it's a classic. And the next movie we have is Megan is Missing from 2011, directed and written by Michael Goy. I'm sorry if I mispronounce any names. I'm sorry. But yeah. So this, to sum it up in short, two teenage girls encounter an internet child predator. Now, this movie was trending on TikTok a while back, and so many people were saying, oh, this is the most disturbing movie ever, da 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 da, and me, who's already seen this movie and most of the other movies on this list, I wouldn't say it's necessarily one of the most disturbing movies, but it is definitely relatable. So the main film follows Megan, who's 14, and her best friend Amy, who's 13, and Megan has a very hard life at school with like a mom and stuff, so she becomes like very close with Amy, and then now Megan, she's introduced to her friend online, a 17-year-old boy named Josh, in a chat room, and they bond quickly. But one day when she goes to meet him in person, she's never seen again. So then it kind of goes off the investigation of finding Megan, and you get to see a lot of Amy's point of view from this. You also get to see really cool news reports, which I think is really interesting. And the thing that most people talk about when describing how disturbing it is the ending, which I can definitely say is disturbing. And also I think it's like the midpoint in the movie, it's they reveal these pictures that Josh had taken of Megan while he was torturing her, obviously. And even though these look very disturbing and everything, the parents of the two child actors, Amber Perkins, who plays Amy, and then Rachel Quinn, who plays Megan, they were actually on the set of the shooting, so everyone was fully aware of their participation and everything. And weirdly enough, a lot of people don't mention this. This was inspired by the real 2002 disappearance of Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis. This took place in Oregon City, Oregon. And basically the same thing happened to them. They were both victims of an internet child predator, and they were killed. Eventually their remains were found stored on the property of a ward weaver. Gaddis's was in a shed, and then Pond's was in a sealed drum buried under concrete. And obviously, if you've seen the ending of the movie, you know that's basically what happens to most of the two girls. And interestingly enough, even though this movie didn't come out until 2011, it was actually shot in 2006 over the duration of a week, and it had a budget of $30,000 to $35,000, but it actually wasn't released until 2011. So I definitely say that this is an interesting movie. I wouldn't say it's the most disturbing movie of all time, or anything of that matter, but it's definitely a good watch, and I believe you can actually find it all on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you could definitely find this all on YouTube, so definitely go check that out if you're interested in this. Okay, so the next movie we're going to be talking on our list is Seven from 1995, directed by David Fincher and written by Andrew Kevin Walker. Now, this follows the story of two detectives, a rookie played by Brad Pitt, and a veteran played by Morgan Freeman. They hunt a serial killer who uses the seven deadly sins as his motives. This takes place in a nameless city, and together they trace the killer's every step, witnessing the aftermath of his horrific crimes one by one as the victims pile up in a rapid succession, all while the moving closer to a gruesome fate neither of them could have predicted. Now, I mean, a lot of people know this movie from that, like, ending scene, that, or like that meme, "What's in the box?" So, yeah, I mean, I personally don't have a lot to say about this movie. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, like, it's a good movie. I wasn't too sure why they put it on this list. I personally didn't find it that disturbing. I mean, I feel like some of these other movies definitely deserve to be on this list, but I'm like, when actually, like, surprisingly, when I saw this movie, I was like, really? I guess. And funnily enough, the main influence for the screenplay was from the writer's time in New York City while he was struggling to be a up-and-coming screenwriter. And me, from New York City, I'm like, how does one correlate with the other? how did your time in New York City make you write a movie about a seven deadly sins killer? I mean, shit, maybe me being like a native New Yorker and everything like that, I'm like, I don't get it. Ya no sé nada, but whatever. So, sorry, moving on. Love you. Okay, moving on. Sorry. Okay, so next we have on this list, I've talked about this before, it's Midsummer. From 2019, directed and written by Ari Aster, period. Okay, so this is on, I mean, if you've seen my first episode where I talk about my top 10 favorite horror movies, then you already know this is one of those, and I honestly love this movie. If you've never seen it, basically a couple travels to Scandinavia to visit a rural hometown's fabled Swedish midsummer festival. What begins as an idyllic retreat quickly devolves into an increasingly violent and bizarre competition at the hands of a pagan cult. So the main characters, Danny and Christian, are played by Florence Pugh and Jack Rayner. They're a young American couple with a relationship on the brink of falling apart. After a family tragedy, he invites her to this trip, and they're all supposed to be working on their thesis paper, but it quickly turns into a very sinister trip with a lot of violence. And honestly, the first time I saw this movie, I was like, yo, what? My sister had showed it to me. She was like, okay, you need to watch this movie. I was like, okay. And I mean, just the opening scene alone is a lot to take in. But I don't know. There's a, like, honestly, I do think this movie deserves to be on this list. This movie is so good. And it's definitely, as the director has, like, described it before, it's a breakup movie. I mean, most of it centers around a breakup, and, like, I mean, in the beginning of the movie, Christian, he's planning to break up with Danny, but because of her family tragedy, he doesn't, so, and because he feels guilty, he invites her on this trip to Sweden, and that's how everything happens. And funnily enough, this movie was originally given an NC-17 rating, so they had to cut 30 minutes from the final film, but this can still be seen in the director's cut of the movie. And the production for this film was announced right after Hereditary, Aster's first film, was released. He also made the short film Strange Things About the Johnsons. I'm sorry if I don't get that right. But honestly, this movie is amazing. I mean, so are the visuals. And for the visual references for Scandinavian folk horror, he used Black Narcissus from 1947, Hard to Be a God from 2013, Macbeth from 1971, and Tess from 1979. And if you haven't seen this movie, I would highly recommend it. It's available on Amazon Prime. If you're already signed up for a Prime membership, then it's for free. Alright, next on this list, I believe we talked about this in the last episode, and that is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. So, the original. None of that bullshit. So, I mean, this is honestly like considered to be one of the first grindhouse horror films, and this came out before some of like the slasher classics like Halloween, and it actually came out right before Black Christmas, funnily enough. So, I mean, it's definitely worth watching. I mean, there's a ton of sequels also. There's sequels, prequels. It's almost as confusing as the Halloween and the Friday the 13th series. I mean, yeah. But basically, the first film follows two siblings and three of their friends. They're going to visit their grandfather's grave in Texas when they fall victim to a family of cannibalistic psychopaths. They pick up a sinister hitchhiker. And then when they're going to their old family home, that's when they run into this family. And I mean, the most iconic person from this movie is probably the main villain, which is Leatherface. But most people think that it's just him when it's an entire family. It's the Sawyer family who is the main antagonist. They're the family of villains. And this was directed and co-written by Tobe Hooper and also written by Kim Heckel. And the main star of this is Marilyn Burns, who also gave us one of the first final girls that, I mean, we all know and love in movies now. Surprisingly, this film was one of the least bloody horror films of all time, though. That's because Tobe Hooper intended to make the film for a PG rating, so he kept the violent moderate, language mild, and he had most of the horror implied off-screen, rather than showing it in great detail. However, this actually made the film more horrifying, and because cutting back and repeated submissions, the rating boards insisted on an X rating, and it wasn't until the film received an R rating when Hoop gave up and released it. He also had a similar rating problem when the sequel was released, and funnily enough, when this movie was first released, apparently it was so horrifying that people had walked out on sneak previews for it. So, I mean, if you listen to my last episode, then you definitely know how much of an impact the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre had on everything, and I mean horror as a whole. And I would definitely recommend checking it out. I mean, it's a classic, and for me, this is one of my favorites. I mean, it never gets old, and if you're gonna check out any of the Texas Chainsaw movies, make it be the 1974 original version. Alright, so that's the end of the first tier. So, pretty normal, pretty standard movies. So now we're at the very top of the iceberg, tier number 2. First up on this list, we have The House That Jack Built, directed by Lars von Trier, and he also co-written it with Jenny Halud. So this story follows Jack, a highly intelligent serial killer, over the course of 12 years, and it depicts his murders that develops his inner madman. This takes place in the U.S. during the 1970s, and we follow Jack from his point of view, and he describes every murder as an artwork and as everything like that, but quickly as the inevitable police intervention is drawing near, he's taking greater and greater risk in his attempt to create the ultimate artwork. Along the way, we also experience his descriptions of his personal condition, problems, and thoughts through a recurring conversation with the unknown verge, a grotesque mixture of sophistry mixed with an almost childlike self-pity and psychopathic explanations. It's a dark and sinister story, but it's also presented as a philosophical and occasional funny tale. So this stars Matt Dillon, Bruno Gaze, and Uma Thurman. Now, this movie is honestly so good. I mean, if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. It's honestly amazing. And Lars von Trier, he also directed another movie that we're going to be talking about later on this list. And, I mean, he's an amazing director. His movies are amazing. And a lot of his movies also get coined with the term, like, most disturbing or very highly disturbing. But, I mean, this movie was like amazing. So But throughout the movie, interesting facts. So this film had its world premiere at the Cannes International Film Festival on May 14th, 2018. It was reported that more than 100 audience members, including critics, walked out during the premiere, though a 6-minute standing ovation also followed the screening. Some of the upset audience members continued to condemn the film on social media for its extreme violence and nihilistic tone. And throughout the movie, the main character Jack, he mentions Iceman, and that was contracted killer John Kuklinski, who committed over 100 murders for organized crime syndicates. And similar to Jack, he often kept the bodies inside of a freezer for a while to make the time of death impossible to ascertain, and that's a habit that gave him his famous nickname also. And I mean, this film also definitely has a lot of disturbing films. I mean, there's one scene where the main character mutilates a duckling when he was a child, but this, unfortunately, like some of the others, wasn't fake. I mean, no, okay, this was fake. This was special effects. So this was done by the help of special effects, and there was no duckling harmed. But even though there was also like audience backlash, but even PETA defended the film in a statement, and it praised its accurate portrayal of the link between adolescent animal abuse and psychopathy. And it's known to be a common trait among serial murderers, especially when they're young. But like I said, like other movies on this list, this is one of the few that does use fake animal deaths, which for me just breaks my heart. I'm such an animal lover, so that definitely breaks my heart a little bit. But moving on. Next on this list, we have Eraserhead from 1977, and this was directed and written by David Lynch. So this follows the main character, Henry Spencer, who's played by Jack Nance. He tries to survive his industrial environment, his angry girlfriend, and the unbearable screams of his newly born mutant child. And this film, it defies conventional logic in storytelling, and it uses a dark, nightmarish atmosphere, and also compelling, disturbing visuals. And the main character, Henry Spencer, he's a hapless factory worker on vacation, and that's when he finds out he's the father of a hideously deformed baby. And now he has to deal with this, and the cries of his mutant baby drive Henry and his girlfriend to near insanity. Though only released at first as a midnight movie, a number of Hollywood A-list directors saw the film and were impressed. This includes John Waters, whose Pink Flamingos and Female Trouble played the same venue, and often he mentioned Eraserhead as a favorite film and urged more viewers to see it. Stanley Kubrick also reported the same, said that this was one of the films he made the cast and the crew of The Shining watch to get in the right frame of mind. Mel Brooks also saw it, and he offered Lynch the chance to direct Elephant Man from 1980, which Lynch accepted, and George Lucas also asked Lynch to direct Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, but he turned that down. And the script, funnily enough, is thought to be inspired by David Lynch's fear of fatherhood. His daughter, Jennifer Lynch, had been born with severely clubbed feet, requiring extensive corrective surgery as a child. She claimed that her own unexpected conception and birth defects were the basis for this film's theme, although from David Lynch, he says that this script was influenced by his reading as a film student. It was mainly influenced by Franz Kafka's 1915 novella The Metamorphosis and Nikolai Gogol's 1836 short story The Nose, and they were both a heavily strong influence on the screenplay. Next, we have Tusk from 2014, directed and written by Kevin Smith. Now, the first time I watched this movie, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. If you haven't seen this movie, I wouldn't call it more disturbing. It's just more weird, and it's one of those movies where you kind of just watch it, and like, at first you're like, okay, this is a little weird, and then it just gets progressively weirder, and I don't even think it's like to the midpoint where you're just like, what the actual fuck am I watching? So this follows podcaster Wallace, who's brash and arrogant, and he travels to Canada to interview someone when he winds up meeting a strange man named Hal, who tells him many stories about his past during his interview. And the next day, he wakes up to find out that Hal isn't the person he thought he was, and the man plans to surgically and mentally turn Wallace into a walrus. That's the plot of the film. And spoiler alert, he succeeds. So it's not more very gory. It's more of just like body mutilation in a way, but like, I don't know. It's very weird. The main character is played by Justin Long, and then you have Michael Parks, and there's also a very weird cameo by Johnny Depp that's very unexpected. It really caught me off guard. I was just like, why is Johnny Depp in this movie? I mean, I don't know. This is a very weird movie. Me and my sister watched it together for the first time, and we were just like, what is this? Like, we were laughing, not as much as we were disturbed by it, like some of the other movies on this list, but we were just like, okay, what is this? Like, I don't know the deeper meanings behind this movie. I don't know. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Ugh. So the last movie that we have on this list is The Human Centipede from 2009, directed and written by Tom Six. I mean, most people know this movie, of course, for the main subject matter, which is the human centipede, where basically a mad scientist kidnaps and mutilates a trio of tourists in order to reassemble them into the human centipede, which is created by stitching their mouths to each other's rectums. Yeah. I mean, most people do know this movie, of course, and I mean, the two main characters are played by two American girls on a trip in Europe, and I'm pretty sure they're in Germany, and of course they get like a broken tire and stuff, and then they show up to this isolated house in the middle of the woods where, of course, they get drugged, and then they find themselves trapped in a makeshift basement hospital with also a Japanese man. Now, this older German man identifies himself as a retired surgeon who specializes in separating Siamese twins. However, these three patients obviously get joined together, and he plans to be the first person to connect people via their gastric systems. So, yeah, apparently director Tom Six, he showed a drawing of the human centipede to all the actresses who showed up at the casting sessions, and like I feel many would, walked out in disgust after they discovered what the role actually would be. And I feel a lot of people don't know this part actually, but the concept of the film actually arose when Tom Six, he made a joke with his friends about how this is an appropriate punishment for child molesters by stitching their mouth to the ass of a very fat truck driver. Specifically, a very fat truck driver. I mean, by all means, do it. They deserve it. But I mean, it's like a classic disturbing movie. So many people have talked about this. I mean, even when I was younger, I think this movie came out in 2009, so I was 8 years old. And I mean, even back then, I heard people like talking about the human centipede, and so many, like, for such a long time, like, it was such a popular thing. And there's 2 sequels to this movie, Human Centipede 2 and 3, and with each one, it gets very like meta and very just like weird and self-aware, and we're gonna talk about the second one later. But yeah. And also, interestingly enough, when he approached investors to the film, the Tom Six told them that they wanted to make an international horror film that involved stitching people together, but they didn't mention how they would be stitched because they feared that the mouth to anus part would put off investors, which, I mean, is very, very, very understandable. Alright, so that concludes tier 2. Now moving on to tier 3. Let's go. Alright, bet. So, first up on our list, we have Mother from 2017, directed and written by Darren Aronofsky. So, this movie follows a couple's relationship, which is tested when uninvited guests arrive at their home, disrupting their tranquil existence. And the main stars of this movie are Jennifer Lawrence, Javier Bardem, Ed Harris, and Michelle Pfeiffer. And this movie is honestly really interesting. I really like this movie personally. It's kind of like an artsy film in a way. I don't know, but it's like very interesting. So basically, like, to further allude on the synopsis, this couple has cocooned themselves in a secluded mansion that was not so long ago burned to the ground, but it was restored by the wife. And within this environment, the once famous middle-aged poet husband is desiring for creating his like perfect art piece, but he's unable to break out of the persistent creative rut that he's in. But unexpectedly, a knock at the door, the sudden arrival of a cryptic late-night visitor and his intrusive wife will stimulate the writer's stagnant imagination. Little by little, much to the perplexed wife's surprise, the more chaos he lets in their haven, the better for his punctured male ego. And funnily, like, none of the characters actually have any real names. So, I mean, the main couple, Jennifer Lawrence, her character's name is, she plays Mother. Javier Bardem, he's him. And then the uninvited couple, Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer, they're just referred to as man and woman. So they're never given any names in the movies, which I think is like kind of an interesting choice, honestly. And I mean, it's not until the credits where like you see what they're labeled as. So that's interesting. And the main character, Mother, who was played by Jennifer Lawrence, after this movie, she took a year off because of how taxing she found this movie to be. And a really interesting like fact that I also found when researching this is that the Mother poster is a replica of Rosemary's Baby from 1968, which was directed by Roman Polanski. So highly, highly, highly recommend checking out Mother. Next on this list, we have Terrifier from 2016, written and directed by Damien Leone. Hey. So, I mean, if you haven't seen this movie, I would honestly recommend it. I'm not gonna lie to you. The acting isn't the best. The story isn't the best. But like I have said before, sometimes it's not about that. And in this movie, that's not the main focus as to why this movie is on this list or why it's so good. Like, honestly, the main like killer, who is Art the Clown, he just completely steals the show. So this movie follows on Halloween night the main character Tara and her friend Dawn. They find themselves at the obsession of a sadistic murderer known as Art the Clown. And this is also a return for the character. He was also in a previous film by the director in All Hallows Eve. And it's also based on the short film Terrifier from 2011. I mean, I really like this movie personally for what it is. I mean, if you're not looking for a very in-depth, like, I don't know, like a very serious horror movie, then this isn't the one for you. It doesn't take itself very seriously, and it's kind of just like very cheesy. It looks very art schooly in a way, but honestly, I feel like that kind of adds like a little bit of charm to it in a way. And I mean, Art the Clown, he just steals this, like, the show, honestly, in every scene that he's in. I mean, and, like, looking at the behind the scenes, the actor who plays him, like, you could just tell, like, how much fun he's having on set and how much fun he's having with this character. And I think that really, like, transcribes on screen. Like, you can, like, really see that, like, he's having fun, like, with his role and everything. Like, I definitely think this movie is a lot of fun, and if you're just looking for like a slasher film, highly recommend it. And also, if you're a big fan of gore, watch this movie. I mean, there's a lot of good gore scenes in it, and that's part of the reason why this movie is usually talked about for like being disturbing. And if you have seen it, then you know that one scene, that one scene Anywho, moving on, we have The Golden Glove from 2019, directed and written by Faith Atkin, based on the novel by Heinz Strunk. This follows a serial killer who strikes fear in the heart of residents of Hamburg during the early 70s. And this was released in Germany, and it's loosely based upon the true crimes committed by the serial killer Fritz Honka, who was active back in the 70s in Hamburg, St. Pauli. The stars Jonah Dassler, Margaret Tessel, and Katja Stud. This is a really good movie. It was released. This is one like the most recent movies on this list, along with Midsummer. But honestly, I haven't seen this movie in a while, but I do remember it being a very good. I did watch it when it came out, and I highly recommend it. I do. I mean, it's just like a good movie overall. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot to say. Alright, moving on. We have I Spit on Your Grave, the remake from 2010, directed by Stephen R. Monroe, written by Adam Rockoff, but he was credited as Stuart Morris. I don't know why, but this is also based on the film by Mayor Zarchi. I'm sorry. But this film follows writer Jennifer Hills, who rents an isolated lakeside cabin in the woods to write a novel, but during her stay, she is brutally gang-ard by 3 local bigots, the sheriff, and a handyman, and she later returns to seek revenge against these assaulters. So, yeah, I mean, this movie is really good. I honestly, I personally like this a lot. I mean, also the original is pretty good from 1974, if I believe. But I would definitely recommend it. And, I mean, I do think it deserves this. I mean, yeah, it deserves this. But according to Jeff Branson, a total of 7 edits were submitted to the MPAA in order to obtain a restricted R rating, fearing that drastic cuts necessary to release with an R rating film would dilute the intended impact of the film. The producers decided to release the original cut theatrically without an MPAA rating. And also, according to the director, the studio submitted an uncut version of the film to the MPAA to see if by chance they would get an R rating. And when they came back, it said, look, you've got an NC-17 movie, but we don't recommend that you cut it down because we feel like it's really impactful. So they decided against editing the movie and released it as unrated so it could play in more theaters. I would highly recommend this movie. I believe it's available for free on Tubi. And this is definitely a really good watch, and it gives you a lot of good kills. It's a little bit disturbing because of like the topic matter, obviously, but highly, highly, highly recommend. Alright, but alright. Next, we have Freaks from 1932, directed by Todd Browning, written by Willis Goldbeck. Now, this movie follows a circus trapeze artist, Cleopatra, and she takes interest in Hans, a midget who works in the circus sideshow. Her interest is only for the money because will be inheriting, and she's carrying on an affair with another circus performer, Hercules. But Hans' fiancée does her best to convince him that he is being used, but to no avail. And at their wedding party, she tells the sideshow freaks what she thinks of them. And together, the freaks decide to make her one of their own. And, I mean, this was, like, one of, like, the first horror movies ever, really. And although production chief Irving Thalberg decided to recut the picture immediately after the disastrous test screening, he couldn't cancel the world premiere on January 28th, 1932 at the 3,000-seat Fox Theater in San Diego, and this is the only venue where the uncut version of Freaks is known to have played. Ironically, the unexpurgated Freaks was a major box office success, and crowds lined up around the block to see the picture, which broke the theater's house record. By the end of the run, word had spread that Freaks was about to be butchered, and theaters advertised your last opportunity to see Freaks in its uncensored form. And funnily, when it was originally released, it was banned in a number of states and cities, and most of them aren't no are no longer enforced. But these laws were never officially repealed, and it is still technically illegal for this film to be shown in some areas of the USA. The film initially ran over 90 minutes, but was severely truncated following the horrific reactions it provoked, and now the extra footage from the ending is presumed lost. And definitely the ending is what most people talk about when they're describing this film, and I could definitely see why. But honestly, this film is a classic. I mean, if you haven't seen it, you just honestly need to. This is one of the most classic films ever, and you could definitely see a lot of influence from this onto American Horror Story season 4 Freak Show, and I think it does a great job of kind of playing into this a lot. And this is also one of the first films to use people with real disabilities, so all the people who played characters in the circus sideshow were actual so-called freaks, and they all had these different disabilities and everything. So I definitely think that that's really interesting, because this film was made in 1932, and that's still a hard thing that some people can't even figure out how to do today, which I'm why? Whatever though. But yeah. Okay, last film on this tier is Pink Flamingos from 1972. This follows notorious Baltimore criminal and underground figure Divine as she goes up against a sleazy married couple who makes a passionate attempt to humiliate her and sees her tabloid-given title as the filthiest person alive. She lives in a caravan with her mad hippie son, Crackers, and her 250-pound mother, Mama Eddie. And this was directed and written by John Waters, and it stars drag queen Divine. And one of the most, iconic scenes of this movie is when main character Divine eats dog feces. And the dog feces in this infamous film were real. According to director John Waters, the dog was fed steak for 3 days beforehand, and Divine's reaction to eating it was actually real. After eating the dog feces, Divine called a hospital emergency hotline, and the night after filming the scene, pretending to be a mother, asking that her child ate dog feces. They told her that the worst thing that could happen was the boy might get white worms. And funnily enough, during filming, Divine was arrested for stealing, but in her defense, she said that she was a method actor playing a criminal. John Waters movies are just a whole different breed. He is a director who made the original Hairspray, and he also made Crybaby with, of course, Johnny Depp. Those are both just kind of cult classics in a way, especially Pink Flamingos. This movie is it's a roller coaster. I don't think there's a better way to describe this movie. It's just a roller coaster. It is. So that is the last movie that we have for tier number 3. Alright, so we're almost halfway there right now, so let's move right on along to tier number 4. First up on our list for this tier, we have Cannibal Holocaust from 1980. This movie follows during a rescue mission into the Amazon rainforest. A professor stumbles across lost films shot by a missing documentary crew. This movie was directed by Ruggero Deodato and written by Gianfranco Clerici and Giorgio Stegani. Now, a lot of people know this movie, and it's on a lot of people's most disturbing list, and I would say with good reason. Because 10 days after the initial premiere in Milan, the film was seized by the Italian courts, and the director, Deodato, he was arrested and charged with obscenity. He was later charged with murdering several actors on camera and faced life in prison. The cast had signed contracts requiring them to disappear for a year after shooting to maintain the illusion that they died. Deodato contacted Luca Barbarski and told them to contact the 3 other actors who played the missing film team. When the actors appeared in court alive and well, the murder charges were then dropped. So, I mean, this definitely had an impact on people, and if you do think about it in the grand scheme of things, this was one of the first found footage films that really was ever out there, and this was also a time before internet and like everything like that having to do with that. So people genuinely thought that he actually killed real life people on screen because that's how real it looked. And I mean, also there are several animal deaths on screen, but those are real. And Deodato says that he now regrets everything that he did, including the animal deaths. He said he was stupid for including it, and like I said, all the animal deaths in this movie are real. The list of dead animals include a coatimundi, a yellow-spotted river turtle, a snake, a tarantula, a pig, and 2 squirrel monkeys. And the monkey killing scene was shot twice, so 2 monkeys were killed for that scene. The dead animals were then given to the tribes for food. And there's also like some debate over there's sexual scenes with the 2 actors, and in the later years there's been some debate over that. In a 2005 interview, Carl Gabriel York said that while rehearsing the sex scene with Francesca Ciardi, she suggested that they go out in the middle of the jungle and actually do it. York declined, saying that he had a girlfriend back in New York, but in 2009, Ciardi stated that the sex scenes were not simulated and that she and York were lovers off screen during filming. So there is a lot of debate about this over like between the 2 actors as to whether or not the sex scenes are simulated or not, but I mean, I definitely think it's interesting to think about that. But I mean, if you're one who doesn't like a lot of gruesome animal deaths and the R word a lot and a lot of gruesome things, then this is not the movie for you. But I would definitely recommend giving it a watch if that, of course, is your thing. And next on this list, we have The Human Centipede 2 from 2011, directed and written by Tom Six. Now, funnily enough, compared to the original, it actually acknowledges the original, and it's inspired by the fictional doctor from the first film. Disturbed loner Martin dreams of creating a 12-person centipede and sets out to realize his sick fantasy. And basically this entire movie is also in black and white, which also adds like another layer to it. But originally Tom Six did shoot full sequence, as it's also called, in color, but he was later told to change it into black and white due to the scenes being a little too gory. And when he was first promoting The Human Centipede, he was starting to write the sequel. People would ask him about his idea from the first being copied in real life, and I mean, that's pretty much the premises of this movie. And what if someone were to actually do this in real life based on the events of the first movie? And like I said, the Human Centipede movies just continue to get like more weird, and you can definitely see that in this one. There's no dialogue in the movie at all. Like, there's not a lot. I don't say there's none, but there's not a lot. And I don't know. I mean, also comparing this to the third one, this isn't the weirdest of the bunch, but I mean, it definitely adds just a little bit of a layer of like meta creepiness. Alright, so the next movie that we have on this list is Antichrist from 2009, directed and written by Lars von Trier. He was also the director and writer of The House That Jack Built, and this movie follows a grieving couple after the death of their child who retreat to their cabin in the woods, and they hoping to repair their broken hearts and troubled marriage. But when nature takes its course, things go from bad to worse. The main stars in this movie are William Dafoe and Charlotte Gainsbourg. And I mean, a lot of people do mention this movie for being like top disturbing, and honestly, I can't see it. There is a lot in this movie where you're just like, what? And I mean, even like the from creation of the film, for example, when filming started, Lars von Trier had just left a mental hospital where he stayed for 2 months receiving treatment for depression. He had not completely recovered at the time and was even unable to operate the camera as he usually does, which made him very frustrated. He repeatedly excused himself to the other actors for being in the mental condition he was, but according to him, the actor supported him throughout the production, and he did not experience any grave problems except for his own condition. And after the movie was released, it received a special Anti Award from the Sentimental jury at Cannes. The jury, which typically awards a film that promotes spiritual and humanist values, decided to award this film an Anti Award for its seemingly misogynistic views. However, Lars von Trier did confirm in a later interview that he was not a misogynist, saying he loved a woman and understood her better than him. Another interesting thing that I think plays into this movie a lot is it is divided into 4 different chapters. You have grief, chaos, despair, and the 3 beggars, in addition to a prologue and an epilogue, all displayed over the abstract designs by Danish artist Perb Kirkby. Alright, next up on this list we have Celo, or 120 Days of Sodom, from 1974, directed and co-written by Pier Paolo Pasolini and co-written by Sergio Cedi. This movie follows in World War II Italy. 4 fascist libertines round up 9 adolescent boys and girls and subject them to 120 days of physical, mental, and sexual torture. Like I said before, this takes place during Nazi fascist northern Italy during, I think the time period for this movie is 1943 to 44, and you have this 4 fascist libertines, or the 4 senior members of government, and they kidnap all these kids and subject them to a manner of all different tortures and degradation and stuff like that. And, like, very interestingly enough, right before the film's release, the director Pier Paolo Pasolini was murdered. A 17-year-old hustler, Giuseppe Pino Pelosi, was arrested when he was found with Pasolini's car. He admitted to running over Pasolini several times with the car after an argument and ended up convicted of the crime. Many years he denied participating in it, claiming that there were 3 mysterious men involved, and to this day the case still remains unsolved. And originally, when this movie first premiered in West Germany in February 1976, it was confiscated by the state attorney in order to ban it. The District Court of Stuttgart classified it as a pornographic and violent praising. A few days later, though, that ruling was reversed and the film was allowed to be distributed nationwide. And there are also behind the scenes and interviews with the actors who have worked in this movie, especially the child actors, and a lot of them have said that, like, even though they were filming such extreme, like, scenes on scene, including the R word, a lot of torture, murdering and stuff like that, that mostly, like, it was a very nice set and, like, it was very easygoing and stuff. And then, of course, there is, spoiler, the notorious scene where a young woman is forced to eat excrement was intended by the director as a metaphor for consumer capitalism and the rise of the junk food culture. So, just, if you haven't seen this movie, I'm just going to leave you with that. But also, I'm not going to necessarily tell you to go watch this movie because it is definitely a very extreme one. And, of course, it deals with a lot of children. So, definitely not for everyone, but of course, this was based on real events, unfortunately. So, it's definitely, like, it's interesting, but it's also very sad to see that these real life things did happen. And, I mean, some of the stuff that happens in the movie, like, is just so out of proportion, and it's ridiculous, honestly, but it is a good watch, and I would recommend it, again, if you're into disturbing movies. That was a lot of talking. Oy. But now we are done with tier 4, going on to tier 5. Bro, we have 3 more tiers left, and 50 minutes in. Wow, this might be my longest episode ever. But yeah, so, I mean, shit. Let's do halftime show. Nah, okay, but honestly, in all seriousness, let's move on. So, starting off on tier 5, we have a Serbian film, directed and co-written by Srđan Spasojevic and co-written by Alexander Radivojevic. I'm so sorry if I'm butchering these names. I'm so sorry. But to simplify this synopsis, it follows an aging porn star, Milos, who agrees to participate in an art film in order to make a clean break from the business, only to discover that he's been drafted into making a pedophilia and necrophilia-themed snuff film. So it deals with, of course, like I said, retired porn star Milos in Serbia with his loving wife Maria, and they have a son Peter also, but they're facing a lot of financial difficulties, and out of the blue he's contacted by one of his former porn friends who offers him a job in an art film. He's introduced to the director, who's a millionaire, and offers to have him in the films, but as it goes on, he has to participate in very disturbing snuff films and porn movies, and it just turns into basically a living nightmare. So, yeah. This film has been banned in at least 46 countries, including Norway, for sexual representation of children and extreme violence in a fictional medium. In the United States, 1 minute had to be cut for an NC-17 rating, and this was the first and only film to receive an R20 plus rating in Japan. And according to the director of this film, he states, "It's a struggle against all corrupt authority that govern over our lives for this purpose, of the power leaders who hypnotize you to do things you don't want to." And a lot of people have said this before, that this talks about a lot of the censorship restrictions that are present in Serbia, and this movie goes against a lot of them, but giving the subject matter of the movie, I don't know if this was the best way to do that. It's definitely a lot to take in. A lot. So, I mean, of course, everyone, like, if you know about disturbing movies, you probably have heard of this, but, like, I'm not gonna go tell you to watch this, but if you are interested in watching it, I recommend reading the synopsis before you do, whether it be, like, Wikipedia or, I don't know, something, just so that you can know what you're getting yourself into, because this movie is very extreme, of course. Okay, the next film on this list is Wedding Throughout, or Base de Noce. So, this film was from 1974, and it's directed by Theodore Zeno and written by Dominique Carney and John Kupferschmidt. And to summarize this film, it's about a mad farmer who falls in love with his pig. It's an art house black and white film with no dialogue, and it's about a man who lives alone on a farm with his pigs. He falls in love with this sow, has off-screen sex with her, and she later gives birth to his human porcine hybrids. And I don't think it's any doubt that this movie had trouble with the Australian censors when it was shown at the Perth International Film Festival in 1975. Normally, censorship does not affect film festivals, but pressure from conservatives forced the Board of Censors to ban the film. It was allowed to be shown after an appeal to the ban, but it was banned again in 1976. So, I haven't seen this movie. I haven't heard prior knowledge about it. There was not a lot of information that I could find about this movie, so we're just gonna move right along. Alright, next up on this list we have Begotten from 1990. This is definitely one of the very weird films. It's very artsy and abstract. It's all in black and white, and it's directed and written by E. Elias Merhinge, and it's presented in a surreal, gory, and entirely visual manner. Begotten tells of the death of religion, the abuse of nature by man, and a nihilistic outlook on what life ultimately is. And another summary of this movie is, God disembowels himself with a straight razor. The spirit-like Mother Earth emerges, venturing into a bleak, barren landscape. Twitching and cowering, the Son of Earth is set upon by faceless cannibals. So, this movie, let's just say some choices were made. Some choices were definitely made when making this movie. Anywho, moving on, we have Come and See It from 1985, directed by Elm Kilmov and written by Ales Adamovich. And this movie follows after finding an old rifle, a young boy joins the Soviet resistance movement against ruthless German forces and experience the horrors of World War II. And I mean, just from that, you can definitely tell that it's just gonna be a sad movie, and it was shot in the genre of a military drama. And the action takes place on the territory of Belarus in 1943. In the center of the story is a Belarusian boy who witnesses the horrors of the Nazi punitive action, turning from a tearful teenager into a gray-haired old man for 2 days. And it has been said that Alesky Karvchenko, who plays the main character, he was so overwhelmed during filming with the film's subject matter that his hair did turn gray during filming. And the original name for this film was also supposed to be Kill Hitler, but that name was changed because it was deemed too inappropriate at that time. At that time, it was too inappropriate, but apparently now it's okay. I mean, then again, it is what Hitler deserves. But this definitely is like more of like a realistic, I guess would say, disturbing movie, because I mean the other movies are realistic in a certain way, but this one really just shows like the terrors of war, especially on a young child, like a young teenager. And I mean, it did have obviously a very strong impact on the actor who played the main character, and I would definitely recommend watching this movie a lot. It is very sad, but you know what? Check it out. Alright. We have 2 tiers left. Let's go. Alright. Should I do a lightning round? No. I'm gonna take my time with this. Alright. Moving on to tier number 6. The first movie that we have on this list is Guinea Pig Devil's Experiment from 1985. This is the first movie in the series, the Sponda series after this, and it was directed by Satoru Ogura. And this movie follows a duo of guys capture and brutally torture a young girl to the point of piercing her retina. And yeah, they also do other things like beat her. They put a sharp piece of metal, of needle-like metal through her eye, of course. And this, like I said, this did spawn a series, and most people talk about the other movies when they're describing it the most disturbing. But I mean, you have to give credit where credit is due. This was the first movie that really kicked off the series, and I think for a good reason. I mean, it's definitely, like, when I was looking it up, I did think that it was disturbing. And especially, like, the torture scenes, because the screams sound so realistic in a way that I was like, wait, like, that just adds, like, a new level, like, oh my god. Alright, moving on. We have Faces of Death from 1978, and this movie is a collection of death scenes ranging from TV material to homemade Super 8 movies. This was directed and written by John Allen Schwartz, and it's a mockumentary hosted by Dr. Francis B. Gross, a coroner, and he's trying to show you the different faces of people when dying. There are fake scenes of people getting killed intermixed with footage of real accidents, and there are executions by decapitation and the electric chair. There's also a group of tourists in Egypt who smash a monkey's head while still alive and eating its brains. There's also shots of animals eating people and satanic orgies using dead bodies. There's also a segment that deals with an alligator that accidentally entered residential waters. The local warden goes into his boat to get the alligator back into the sea when he accidentally falls over and becomes gator bait. The film ends with newsreel footage of people jumping off buildings in major accidents. So, definitely easy to understand why this movie's on here. Definitely easy. Okay. I'm just gonna go through these really quickly because I feel like there's not that much to say about them because like they're just disturbing movies. They just really are. So next on this list we have Snuff 102 from 2007, written and directed by Mariano Bellarta. I don't know, shit. But it basically follows a young reporter who begins to unravel the secrets of an underground myth, snuff films. Soon, she falls into a gruesome spiral of shocking images not suited for the faint-hearted, and investigations on snuff films and onto the true meaning of violence. So, definitely see where that's going with that. So that's a conclusion of tier 6. I'm sorry if I'm moving through these really quickly. I'm just like, wow, I talk a lot. I mean, also that's what you do on a podcast, but alright. I'll talk more about tier 7 in depth, so let's move on to that. So now we're on the last tier, the final tier, the very bottom of the deep iceberg. Alright, let's jump right into it. jumping off with our first movie on this list, we have August Underground from 2001. This was directed and co-written by Fred Vogel and Alan Peters. It follows two serial killers who go on a murdering rampage as one films the outcome from behind a video camera. And while traveling to Canada to attend a film festival in Toronto, director and co-writer Fred Vogel was arrested, pending charges of transporting obscene materials into Canada, when copies of August Underground and its sequel were found by custom officials among the merchandise he had intended to bring into the convention. The charges were eventually dropped after Vogel had spent roughly 10 hours in customs prison. And, I mean, this movie really... Like, when you're watching it, it honestly does feel like it could be a real snuff film. It really does feel like that. The opening scene starts off with a woman who is tied to a chair, and the cameraman is, like, introduced to this. Like, he's, like, filming his friend, and then, but it's also, like, cut in between scenes of just them doing regular things. Like, there's a scene where they go to a party, there's a scene where they're just, like, talking and stuff. So it honestly does make it feel like a real snuff film, honestly. And they do this, but after they kill her, they go on a killing spree in the streets of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, abusing, beating, dismembering, and killing all those unfortunate enough to cross paths with them. And of course, the camera captures everything on tape. But like I said before, it is not a real snuff film, and it's really funny because the director and co-writer, and then the other co-writer, Fred Vogel and Alan Peters, they play the two main characters, so they're definitely like. It gives you that feeling that this could be a real snuff film, but it isn't. Alright. Next on this list, we have Slaughtered Vomit Dolls from 2006, directed and written by Lucifer Valentine. I mean, with a name like that, your movie should be on this list, bro. But this movie follows the gruesome depiction of psychological manifestations of a 19-year-old bulimic runaway stripper turned prostitute as she descends into a hellish pit of satanic nightmares and hallucinations. When Lucifer Valentine made this film, he coined it as vomit gore, a new subgenre, and this would later become the first movie in the vomit gore trilogy, followed by Regurgitated Sacrifice in 2008 and Slower Torture Puke Chamber in 2010. There is also a fourth vomit gore film titled Vomit Gore 4: Black Mass of the Nazi Sex Wizard, released in 2015. So, I mean, that sounds fun. Alright, and then the very last movie that we have on this list is Engineering Red from 1993, directed and co-written by Andrew I and co-directed by A. Petrosian. When I was looking up the names for the directors and the co-writers, I couldn't find their first or last names. They both had it like initialized, so I don't know why it's like that, but this film was divided into 3 chapters and has 2 different storylines, documentary and fiction. The documentary part consists of natural footage of operations on transplanting toes onto a human hand, moments from the life of conjoined twins, clippings, almost definitely a propaganda film for doctors on the use of dead blood in practice medicine, and so on. The fictional part consists of psychedelic films. We have scenes of a red room, a girl in red silk. We have kaleidoscope images. There's also a female voiceover who reads an excerpt from The Magic Mountain, in which the thoughts of a deceased soldier are heard, his consciousness still in a dead body. Sounding his reflections on Christ, the apostles, and the Bible, the soldier's body then falls prey to necrophilic children. So... There's that film. There's that film for our last film on this list. So, yeah, that's the end of this list. I'm like, I don't know how to end this. Like, I don't know how to end this episode on like a happy note. Like, yay, disturbing movies, especially with some names like Slaughtered Vomit Dolls. I mean, you're in for a treat when you click on that movie. But in all reality, I hope you guys did really enjoy this episode, and I will definitely link the original photos below for where I found these icebergs. And if you guys do want a longer version of this, I will definitely do that, and like I'll definitely make that into like a new episode and everything like that. But yeah, I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're listening to us on any other streaming services, please don't forget to follow us on Instagram. And also make sure to turn on post notifications to get notified whenever I post a new episode. I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. And don't forget to stay spooky. Alright, bye guys.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?